Hey gang, it is January 7th, 2019, and I didn't plan to do this video today. However, I'm having problems with my 2000 Ford Focus with the 2.0 liter Z-Tech engine. It has 215,000 miles on it, and I recently have been seeing a lot of oil on the ground, and obviously that's a concern. So I started looking at it, and it was pretty evident that oil was leaking excessively. I don't know if I can get enough light on that or not, but there's oil all over the place, even to the point of it being on the belt and on my alternator, and it's all over the place. So let me look at it, show you what it looks like from underneath. So I'm finding a lot of oil on the underside of the car as well, which is never a good sign, even to the point of being on the exhaust. I could smell it burning off, and I think there could be a couple things that could be causing this. Let me get a better angle. I think it could be the crankshaft seal. See if I can, yeah, there's the crankshaft pulley driving the serpentine belt, and you can see on the bottom side right here where I'm pointing with my light, that's pretty clean, and what that usually indicates is oil has been flowing pretty consistently there and accumulating in other places, because you see where the engine's dirty, that's just residual muck and junk floating around and accumulating over the years. But anytime you have fresh oil like flowing, like there you can see on this around the flange where the oil pan meets the base of the block, that's very clean. So like I said, that's usually an indication that oil is moving in that area and it's removing the debris with it. But oh man, I didn't want to have to mess with this, but I don't think I have a choice. But again, I think it's the seal on the crankshaft. So I guess I have my work cut out for me. Man, there's oil just running off that frame. What a mess. As you can see, initially I put this car up on ramps because I was going to look at things and also do an oil change because it's due, but I elected to remove the tire and put it up on a jack stand. So if you're going to do a repair like this, I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. I would just leave the driver's side on the ground and jack up the passenger side and put it on a jack stand. Now the next part I'm going to do is remove this inner fender liner. It may not have to be completely removed, but for the sake of working on that pulley right there, I think it'll just be easier if I remove the whole thing. So to do that, I'm going to need to use this little, it's kind of like a star socket. This is like one of those security sockets. That's the only thing holding that bolt right there. And then the rest of them are just standard plastic plugs that you can try to remove with a screwdriver if you want. Sometimes they'll turn loose. These have been out before, so they're pretty worn out. So the alternative is to get behind them with a little screwdriver, dig in to where that makes contact, and just pry that back out. Once that center comes loose and gets out far enough, then the whole plug will come off. Now for me to remove the crankshaft, I'm going to have to remove the serpentine belt, and this thing is pretty nasty, so I'm probably going to end up replacing it anyway. Not that that matters in the removal process, but I'm just saying because it's soaked with oil. So straight above the CV axle is the belt tensioner. And what I want to do is hook this wrench. This is a 15 millimeter. I want to put it on that bolt, and then to gain some leverage, I'll interlock a 17 millimeter into this and then rotate it downward, and that relieves tension on the belt. Now you can see. So with that process, I can slip the belt off of, let's say, the crankshaft pulley. But this thing is slippery. There. And then I can remove it from the car. I should have said in that previous segment that anytime you remove a serpentine belt, do yourself a favor and either take a lot of pictures or draw out a little diagram, and I've already done it for myself, so that you know how this goes back on. But let me just show you this. This thing is soaked with oil. I've never seen a serpentine belt that is just, well, like rubber. That's just terrible. So obviously that's scrap. I'm going to have to replace that. At this point, I need to remove the crankshaft pulley. The center bolt is an 18 millimeter, and I'm using a 1/2 inch impact air gun. So get that on there and set that out of the way. Now hopefully I can pull that pulley off without it hitting the frame. Hopefully. Well, I got the crankshaft pulley out, obviously, and now I can see there's basically a puddle of oil. You can see the reflection underneath that timing gear. So the next step, I'm going to have to remove the plastic covers, and you can just see there's a little bolt there, there's another one over there. I'll have to start removing these covers and get access to the timing belt. From what I see, I need to remove the reservoir for the radiator so that I can access this upper engine mount and get it loose and out of the way, and then remove these covers. And you can see there's little, looks like probably 8 millimeter bolts. So I'm going to start on that process and try to get these things out of the way so I can access that timing set. There's a 10 millimeter bolt right here that holds that tank in place. And then it's got a little release catch in the back. See if I can unhook these hoses. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to be removing this engine mount. And there are two nuts on this that are 18 millimeter. So I'll get those loose. But before I do that, I'm going to put a jack underneath the vehicle to support the engine. I'm going to put a block of wood on top of the lift point on my jack, because you don't want to put that against your oil pan. You could dent it or cause more problems. So by spreading it over a block of wood, spreading the weight, you eliminate that problem. So I'm going to do that prior to removing this. So now that I have the jack in place, I'm going to use my 18 millimeter socket, my 1/2 inch impact, as you can see, it pulled out the whole stud, which isn't a problem. There you saw the engine go down a little bit. This one, the nut came off. Now, the next part of this is going to be get the main assembly loose. There are 3 bolts here, so I need to get those out of the way. And these bolts are 15 millimeter. and that's the engine mount. As you can see, it's got a nut on the bottom, but you can't access that unless you take the whole assembly out. So if you have a failed motor mount or engine mount, that's how you remove that. Now I'm going to remove the upper timing cover. From what I can see, there's a bolt back here and one up here, and those are 8mm. There are two more. There's one down here and another one underneath that upper one. Well, that's interesting. Apparently, this bolt, that the stud that holds the engine mount, is going to cause an interference problem. So I need to get that off. Well, that was luck. That same 8mm socket fits the end of that. That same 8mm just happened to fit the end of that stud. That's cool. Alright, set that out of the way. There you can see, of course, this is a double overhead cam engine, so it's going to have two camshaft drive gears. And by looking at the condition of the timing belt, it may be worth it to go ahead and replace that as well. I see lots of little tiny cracks in it, which is probably normal, but I don't know when this was ever changed. There are videos out there that go into more detail about changing out the timing gear set, and really this isn't, I'm not focused on doing that as a video, but I am focused on changing that seal, so I'm going to have to get this apart. I know that this piece right here where the light is has to come off, and it looks like there's a couple bolts down there. Probably I'll have to look at that closer, maybe a 12mm, and there's another one right there where the light is pointed. So I'll have to get that out of the way. I may have to remove that idler pulley as well, but we'll figure that out. I think I'll just go ahead and remove that idler pulley, and that is a 13mm. So I'm going to put a wrench on it, interlock my second wrench, and break that loose. There we go. You can probably see there I jacked the engine up a little bit. It's a very long bolt. It's a pretty long bolt in that thing. And I did jack the engine up to help give me some space to pull that off. It's a good time to check these as well while you're there. That one seems to spin pretty nice. 13mm. Pretty long bolt. That one's even longer. Make note of that. Now, from what I see, that should take care of any bolts or hardware that's up here at the top. But I do see there's some small 8mm, if I can see it properly. There's like an 8mm, it's really crusty, bolt down there, and I believe there's another one, yep, up there. And I'll take those two off and at least give me access or removal of that lower cover. Now you can really see the oil flowing out of that, where that cover is. So I'm pretty confident that seal is no good anymore. Now that I'm looking at it from underneath, I can see there's a recessed bolt, and it's right behind the pulley for the water pump. So that's really nice. It means I got to remove this pulley, and those are 3, I believe, 8mm bolts. So that's kind of fun to remove. And then up that direction, there's another bolt that'll have to come off to get that center cover off. Now, to get this pulley off of the water pump, the easiest way to do this is to take a screwdriver and wedge it between 2 of the bolts while you put a wrench on the 3rd bolt, and then break that one loose. And then repeat that on each one of those. It's going to be too tight for me to show you that actually happening, but you're just using the bolts as a wedge with the screwdriver holding them in place. Hope that makes sense. Hopefully you can kind of see what this is. That other piece I need to remove. I've already taken out that lower bolt that I was talking about that had the, I don't know what you call that pattern. It's like a star, but it's not really an Allen wrench. And thankfully I had a set of these from another project, and it was a T50 that fit that. And all I did was interlock a wrench onto that end and break it loose. Bolt came right out. Now I will point out, after doing that, I started getting antifreeze leaking. So I believe this has something to do with the water jacket or a secondary cover of some sort. So just be warned that you may get some antifreeze. So that's out. And I still have one more bolt, and it's underneath here. That was kind of hard to show you. It's loose. I just need to get it out. So now you can see why it was hard to show you that bolt, and it's fairly long as well. So now that's out of the way. Alright, for this next part, I am not going to be doing this in the conventional sense. There are tools that exist to make this easier. Repair shops will have, a whole kit designed for this purpose. The way I look at it is, as long as I don't mess up the location of the 2 cam gears and I don't change the crankshaft location, then really all I have to look at is the tensioner over here, and hopefully you can see that okay, and this idler pulley. So I know that I need to take this loose. This is offset. It kind of cams around, and you can look at and push on the belt at the top there and just see, there's a little bit of play, but I want to loosen this up to take tension off. And to do that, there's this is I believe a 6mm. I know from my little Allen wrench set that says 6mm on it, and that fits into that little tab right there. And I will say that I have also put 2 marks on these teeth that are in line with each other, just as kind of a verification, because it is critical that everything is in sync. So again, as long as I have these lined up and they I don't change the crankshaft location, I should be fine. If you're not comfortable doing it this way, by all means don't. If you want to take it to a shop and have them do it, fine. But my job is to replace that seal. And so this is just how I'm doing it. Now this bolt is a 10 millimeter. So I'm going to break that bolt loose. That's going to allow this to cam around. Hopefully you can see that. You can see where I have it pointed right now. When I rotate that, it takes the tension off. You can see that pulley pull away. I know it's kind of hard to see with it. My hand's in the way, but you can hopefully get the idea. So now, with that, I'm going to remove that. So there you can see how that operates a little more. This cams, well, it's kind of hard to show you there because it's not attached anymore, but it has an offset to it. So again, if you're not comfortable doing this, skip ahead. I'm going to take this belt off. And like I said, I'm probably going to replace this. There's a part number on it. Gatorback, Goodyear. Hard to say when this was installed, I don't know. But it's got lots of little cracks in that surface. Now at this point, I should be able to grab a hold of this gear and slide it off. Now of course, this only fits on one way. You know, it's even labeled front. So there's only one way that can go back on. And pull this off. And that will give me access to that seal. Now the fun part, getting that seal out of there. So as you can see, with this tool, it's a Mac. I'm not sure what the real name is, but this has always been called a booger hook, at least in the aircraft industry. So I was able to dig at that a little bit, you know, try to create a little something to hang on to. And there it is. Now that seal, that's probably the original seal, and hopefully this is what's been causing all these problems. So I'll get another one of those and start working my way backwards. I picked up the replacement parts today from O'Reilly Auto Parts, and for the timing belt I'm using a T294 Gates belt, and then I picked up the gasket kit crankshaft front seal set, and the part number on that you can see there, TCS 46015. Now in this kit it comes with the crankshaft seal. I believe this is a there's another gasket in here, and then this is a gasket that holds the main assembly that would and I'll show you that in a minute. But this comes with this little, to me it looks like an oil pump gasket, but I'm not changing all that. All I want is the seal. And then this is the timing belt that I'm using, the serpentine belt, Gates, and there's the part number for that. Now I'm going to show you this gasket. This is a well, let me show you. This has this housing as an assembly, and there's a series of bolts that go around the perimeter of that, and to get that off is going to be probably more complicated than I want to deal with, unless it was definitely the leak. But you can see again up there are these bolts, and that's where the gasket would go. It's kind of hard to put it up in there, but it's going to follow the pattern. Now my concern is, if I want to take that out, is the seal here, because At the parts store they said I would need an oil pan gasket to change this. Well, if you look, the oil pan is way down here. So that implies to me that in order to get this off, I would have to take off the oil pan and then this whole lower assembly, which I don't think I want to do that. And not unless I absolutely have to. So I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm just going to install the crankshaft seal itself and then reverse the order of everything that I've removed. Hopefully I can do this without too much interference. As you can see, this is the old seal and this is the new seal. A little bit different look to it, but obviously it's what comes in the kit. It's what I'm using. So what I'm going to try to do is use this this is a 35 millimeter spindle nut or axle nut socket, and that fits pretty close to the dimension of the seal. So I've already wiped out around the crankshaft, and I'm going to put the seal up there. Try to get it started as best I can, and then using the socket. I will point out, you know, we're looking at that seal, you want to make sure you put it in the correct way, because there's a relief in the seal and then the front is going to be flat, so you want that relief to go to the back side. So get that up there. Like I said, it's kind of hard to do with the camera. Yeah, it's going in. That's good. And I am using just a little dead blow hammer. That's pretty close. Now, what I'll probably do is get a slightly smaller socket, because this may just be getting close to the edge of the housing. And I'll see if I have one that'll go inside that just a little bit. This socket is a 34 millimeter, so I'm going to try that. I think that's it. That feels really good. It's flush all the way around. So now I can continue on and start putting everything back together. I wanted to point out while I'm at this point that if you're going to have to replace your water pump, other than removal of the timing belt and all that assembly, the process is the same. And in other words, to remove the water pump, you have to take off the serpentine belt, you have to take out the engine mount, and you have to lower the engine down so that you can remove the pulley off of the water pump, and then you can remove the water pump itself. As you can see, this one's clean because I'd actually replaced this 4 or 5 months ago, and I didn't do a video on it, but I probably should have. But that's the process to get to that point. So now I'm going to go and put on the lower timing gear and start reinstalling everything associated with the timing belt. So now I'll reinstall this little plate. So now I need to reinstall the adjuster. And if you see this squared off flange or tab, there is a square hole, a rectangular hole, slightly below the rear camshaft. So that goes into that hole. I'm just going to snug the bolt up a little bit so it stays there. And then, as I pointed out in the previous segment, I've got my little marks here on the camshaft, and that's critical. I want to make sure those are in the same place, because this morning before I started, I looked, and this had the compression of the or the pressure of the springs in the camshaft had rotated this one to where it was up here. That's why it's critical you mark those and make sure they're in the right spot before you go any further. So now I have my new timing belt, and this will be a little bit tricky to get all this to go together without too much without it being a problem, I should say. So I'm going to, and this may take a few tries. It may not go right on in the first attempt, because there's not much room for adjustment. You get it set, and you have to have everything in sync, obviously. And I may have gotten lucky and gotten on the first try. Again, if you're not comfortable doing this, by all means, don't, because it's, you know, you're taking a risk with messing up your engine. So now that I have the timing belt in place and I'm happy with my alignments, I can turn this tensioner up and then retighten it. Well, it's kind of hard to see there, but again, taking that little 6mm Allen wrench, putting tension on it. This is a close-up of the tensioner pulley, and I wanted to point this out. There is a notch, you see right here, and there's a line on this tab that is fixed in that slot. And when you change the angle on your adjuster, that little fork looking deal will move up and down, and ideally that's where you want it to be. You want it to be in that center. So if I move the adjuster using the Allen wrench, you can see that change, that move. Hopefully you can see it. And I want it to be right in the middle, and then I'll tighten up the 10mm bolt that holds the adjuster in place. Holding that up, and then retightening the 10mm bolt that holds the assembly on. Now with the timing belt in place and all that taken care of, I can go back and install this piece, which has that special bolt that goes behind the water pump pulley. So I need to get that in there. And I also had these other two bolts. Remember, one is longer than the other. I'll say the one aft is the long one. And again, those bolts are a 13mm. So I'm going to make sure those are snug. The one down below is a little trickier to get to. A little bit different angle, But here you can see the water pump. Hopefully you can see it. I know it's kind of hard, but I've got to reinstall the pulley, and it's going to be easier to do it from underneath. I don't know if this will end up being a good angle or not, but like I was saying before, you use the bolts as a wedge or a brace, and then you can put tension on the bolt and tighten it down. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing there. I can't really tell by the camera angle. And you just do that with all three of the bolts. Now I'll install this lower cover. It takes two 8mm bolts. So get that in place. And then I'll install the crankshaft pulley. Get that lined up. Now at this point, I did jack the engine up higher because I need to get this pulley in for the serpentine belt, and that goes down here. You won't get that in if the engine's sitting low. And again, that's a 13mm. And now I want to install the upper cover over the timing gears. This has 4 bolts, 8mm, 2 up high and 2 down low. Now really, the next step is to install the engine mount or motor mount assembly. But now that I look at it, I think it makes more sense to install the serpentine belt at this point. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole process of laying all that out, but I will say that with all that oil that was on there, I did degrease this so that that would not, hopefully not contaminate the new belt. And I'm going to get the belt on there, and then I'll go back to putting this mount in. Okay, the serpentine belt is in place, and if you just want a general guideline, start at the alternator. It's going to go down outside or around the tensioner. From the alternator, it's going to go under this idler pulley. It'll come up around the power steering, go straight down, and I'll show it from underneath, to the AC. And from the AC, it'll come up, go across to the crankshaft, come up around the crankshaft, go around the water pump, and that'll take you back down to the tensioner pulley. Again, there's diagrams online. I know every little bit of information can help. So maybe you can see there's the AC unit, crankshaft, water pump, and then of course back there, I don't know if I can get a good angle or not. So with that in place, and that was a lot easier without the mount here, Now I can get that mount in place and get this engine bolted back down. Now hopefully I can get this done before it starts raining on me. This only goes in one way. Takes 3 15mm bolts. But before I tighten those down, I want to put my other bolts in place. So if you remember, that one bolt came out, or needed to come out just to get this apart. So get that back in there. And that was just an 8mm socket. So I'll run that down some. And then the other bolt. So now I can tighten up the 15mm. Now, I don't know if you can see, but there's a gap right now between the mount and the engine. So I'm going to jack the engine up a little bit. There we go. That's nice. And then I'll go with the 18mm. And now I can let the jack down all the way. So now I just do a double check. I make sure, all the bolts are in place. It's just kind of a habit I have of looking over everything prior to my final, close up. And so I'll get the reservoir tank back in place. And I know that it had this little 10mm bolt. Cool. Now, other than putting the fender liner back in, and I'm actually going to do an oil change on this, but aside from getting the fender liner in, I think that's it. Actually, there is one more thing I need to do. I need to see if it runs. That's a good sign. Okay, it's been running for 15 minutes. I see no evidence of oil from the previous location. So that's a good sign. Hopefully it stays this way. But that's it. I put the liner back in the fender well. I still have to put the wheel on. I did do the oil change, of course, and I'm happy with it. Again, this isn't a video that I really wanted to make. I've got, classic Mustang stuff to do, and I'd rather be doing that right now. But this is my daily driver, and I need it to do errands and go to work, so have to fix it. If you stay this long, I say thanks for watching. If you want to subscribe, that would be great. If you want to throw a thumbs up on there, that would be helpful as well. And that's it. So we'll see you later. Take care of yourselves. And then I'll install the, I can go back with this piece, which again has that bolt that takes the special tool. Now that all of no.